Good afternoon, I'm Pat Morrison. We are here at UCLA to discuss Proposition 23, the greenhouse gas bill that may or may not determine California's environmental and jobs future. We're going to spend an hour hearing all about that with a live audience here at UCLA. And with questions from that live audience, after we spent some time with our experts on either side of this and with a panel of experts who are about to ask their own questions as well a little later in the program, I'd like to introduce two of the debaters on either side, of course, of Proposition 23, which goes by, well, different names depending on who it is you're talking to. The Proposition 23 supporters, which would undo parts of AB 32, the California Greenhouse Gases Bill, call it the California Jobs Initiative. On the other side, it's the Stop the Dirty Energy proposition. So that gives you a pretty good idea of where we stand in the first place as far as pro and anti on this particular proposition. On the arguing in favor of Prop 23 is Dorothy Rothrock. She's Senior Vice President of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, advocating government for a strong business climate for manufacturers in California. Thank you for being here. She also chairs the AB 32 implementation group, which tries to ensure that greenhouse gas emissions are reductions required by AB 32 also keep businesses in mind. And Tammenin is CEO of Seventh Generation Advisors. It's an environmental and clean technology advocacy group. And he founded the Santa Monica Bay Keepers, some waterkeeper programs in California watersheds, served as secretary of the California Environmental Protection Agency, and had a hand in the crafting and the passage of AB 32, which Governor Schwarzenegger signed in 2006. Thank you both for being here. Let me start with Dorothy Rothrock and the arguments in favor of Proposition 23, especially considering, Ms. Rothrock, that you worked on the implementation group for the existing legislation. Proposition 23 would undo a lot of AB 32, including requiring that California have an unemployment rate of 5.5% for an entire year, which is a rarity, so much so as to make Proposition 23 essentially undoing most of AB 32. So if you could please make your case for Proposition 23.
Well, the reason why the Manufacturers Association particularly is very much in support of Prop 23 is that the effect of AB 32 would be to raise energy prices in the state. We think that by the year 2020, it would cost about 1 million jobs. And in fact, energy prices are already so high in the state that my manufacturers are paying an average of about 53% more than the average of the rest of the country. And I'd like to correct some of the description about the proposition. It temporarily postpones AB 32 until the unemployment rate reaches the 5.5% or less for a continuous 4 quarters.
And just to ask you, when was the last time California had 5.5% unemployment?
I believe the last time was before the recent recession, 2005, 2006, something like that. And it was at that level for 3 extended periods since 1988.
Can you all hear?
Yeah. It's not that rare an event. It's been about 30% of the time since 1988. And it's also of interest that whenever the unemployment rate drops and gets to about 7.5% or so, it always keeps going down, at least in modern history. So it's not that extreme a requirement. In fact, when AB 32 passed, the unemployment rate was 4.8%.
So, Ms. Rothrock, California is the biggest state in the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, which is the United States. Why shouldn't it take the lead as it has with things like tailpipe emissions in automobiles?
It should take the lead, and I think another important point about Prop 23 is it doesn't stop many of the very aggressive measures that we've adopted over the years in California. We have a very aggressive renewable portfolio standard. We have the vehicle standards that were passed in legislation. We call them the Pavley vehicle standards, for good reason. And those do not go away in AB 32. The only thing that we're really talking about here in Prop 23, for the most part, is cap and trade. And that is the most troublesome regulation for the manufacturers. and it's also going to be very expensive for consumers, local governments, anybody that uses energy in any way, which is basically every sector of the economy.
How is it not going to also then pay off in terms of, as we've seen with the tailpipe emissions thing, we've seen improved health, we haven't seen a dent in the economy because of it. Why is it called a jobs killer?
Well,
each
CARB has actually tried to do an economic analysis of each of the measures underneath AB 32, which is, if you don't know, it's a framework bill that sets a target and gives CARB authority to do regulations, and it also tells CARB to count all the things that we're doing already anyway. Some of those things are justified for many reasons, that saves money, perhaps energy efficiency programs that are funded by the utilities. That saves money because you can lower your bills, and that makes sense. So a lot of those cost-saving measures, CARB is counting as offsetting the higher prices that will be associated with cap and trade. And that nets out into what they say is an acceptable set of policies. What we're saying is that Prop 23 is really the good way to go because we're keeping all of those regulations and policies that are beneficial and perhaps will save us money. We're only stopping the most expensive ones, including cap and trade.
So Terry Tammenin, who opposes Prop 23, who in fact had a hand in crafting AB 32, which, as I said, Governor Schwarzenegger signed in 2006, one of his signature pieces of legislation in his administration. What problems do you have with Prop 23?
Well, Pat, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me to make this point of view. And I just also want to thank Glenn McDonald, the director of the UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability, for hosting us, and you for moderating, and the LA Times and KPCC for giving us this chance. And Dorothy, thank you for coming up here. It takes a lot of bravery to defend two Texas oil companies who are bankrolling a proposition to literally steal the breath of our children.
But let's talk about the hedge funds.
And Pat, that would be the first thing that I have a problem with, is that the roughly $9 million raised for the Prop 23 campaign, the Dirty Energy campaign, was paid for by two out-of-state Texas oil companies, Valero and Tesoro. I believe Valero is the chair of the CMTA board this year. And they clearly have an interest in keeping us addicted to their products, their oil, and the pollution that has continued to cause. I think when we hear from Dorothy talking about increased prices on energy, that's patently false. We've seen everywhere that these kinds of policies have been adopted, we've seen that Californians save money on their energy bills. Californians are 40% more energy efficient than the rest of the nation. We actually have lower energy bills than the rest of the nation, and it's because of passing regulations like AB 32, things that are around energy efficiency, for our Energy Star appliances, which now the entire country gets to enjoy, the kinds of compact fluorescent lighting and other energy efficient lighting that you've seen. As Dorothy said, she even likes the fact that you can now drive more efficient, fuel-efficient cars that are less polluting, less harmful to our kids. And so we understand that these kinds of regulations actually make us more healthy and wealthy. And that's the other part which I take issue with what Dorothy said in her opening remarks about jobs. I can point to you specific jobs that have been created by California's clean energy initiatives that are supported by AB 32 and that would be undermined by Prop 23. Several independent studies show 500,000 clean tech jobs in the state of California. But the point is, I can point to somebody on a rooftop putting in a solar panel right now that's a job you cannot outsource to India, but Dorothy cannot point to a single job that's going to be lost. When they talk about truckers, for example, what trucker is going to stop delivering the products from the Port of Los Angeles to the Walmart or the Safeway to serve 38 million Californians, just because perhaps they have to turn their truck off and not idle when they're unloading the products, which is one of the regulations that the CMTA and others object to. Who is going to stop the oil companies themselves, Valero and Tesoro, that operate their refineries here in California? Are they going to stop serving the 30 million motorized vehicles in the state of California because AB 32 moves ahead? I doubt it. So the jobs will be created by the clean, green tech economy that numerous sources have said would be upset by this Proposition 23 and the uncertainty that it brings.
Ms. Rothrock, what jobs have been lost already, as far as you're concerned, by AB 32, and what jobs are you predicting are to be lost?
I think that the the main issue is looking at California's economy. We've lost about 630,000 manufacturing jobs since 2000. We'll stand to lose more. Other states are doing a much better job at both promoting clean tech, clean energy initiatives, as well as maintaining or improving their manufacturing economy. And while a lot of what Terry is saying is true, the point is it doesn't have anything to do with Prop 23. I think what we've got to be clear about in this debate is what is going away and what is staying. Million solar roofs. That's why there's a guy on a roof putting in a solar panel. Renewable portfolio standard. Most of it's going to continue. 20% of the emission reductions are coming from cap and trade. That's the one that's going to be suspended. Even Mary Nichols says it's not a good idea to go forward with cap and trade unless we have the other states in the western region going along with us. If we impose that cost on our economy and other states don't, there will be out-migration of manufacturing. If we're pushing manufacturing out, if we're producing things somewhere else, those emissions are occurring somewhere else, the globe is impacted, and we've lost the jobs. It's a bad environmental result, which is why AB 32 says that the measures need to be cost-effective.
All right. Mr. Tammenin, your response?
Yes, first of all, on the manufacturing thing, I'm glad Dorothy brought that up because actually the head of her organization I was debating at the LA Chamber of Commerce a couple of weeks ago, and he put up a slide that showed the precipitous decline in manufacturing jobs in the state of California that we would all agree, Dorothy, is true. In the decade before AB 32 was even written, the decline occurred dramatically. And since then, in fact, the only area of growth in manufacturing jobs has been in the clean tech sector, which investors have said would be threatened by Prop 23. Just yesterday, 70 investors representing $400 billion of investment capital, banks and Silicon Valley investors that gave us the clean tech sector and gave us Google and gave us eBay and so forth, they all got together and they said that this sector would be imperiled if Prop 23 passes. So even the Silicon Valley Manufacturing Group, which is now called the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, agrees with that their manufacturing has only increased because of these progressive policies and would be hurt by Prop 23.
Ms. Rothrock, if the private sector and market-driven considerations can create these jobs and can take the place of any cap and trade requirements, why haven't they done so far?
Could you ask the question again?
That if the market, if the private sector can do all of these things without an AB 32 setting these kinds of requirements, why hasn't it done so far? You refer to other states having done it without AB 32.
Absolutely. Oregon is in the lead. They're the fastest growing clean energy state. They do not have an AB 32. In fact, I commend the Pew Charitable Trust report, The Clean Energy Economy, Repowering Jobs. They go across the country and they look at every single state and what's being done, what percentage of the economy is clean energy jobs, what are the incentives, what are the grants, what are the policies, what are the things that really matter. Now, not anywhere in this report is AB 32 mentioned. So it doesn't matter. It's the renewable portfolio standard. It's the grants for alternative fuel development. It's the vehicle standards that are going across the country. The point is, all of that is continuing. We're not going to be losing it. And that's really what's very deceitful about the campaign, is that they're holding up AB 32 as if it contains all of this, but it doesn't. It's just the flag on top of all of these policies that we've had all along.
So, Mr. Tammenin, given that this was signed into law, AB 32, in 2006, if Prop 23 were to pass, what do you think California would stand to lose in actual jobs, actual revenues?
I think it stands to lose all of these things. Dorothy's right. Obviously, some of these other, the Million Solar Roof Initiative, the Tailpipes Initiative, some of these other things that have given us clean technology and lower amounts of pollution would not go away. But these investors are not wrong when they say that Prop 23 sends the wrong message. It says that we don't care about these things anymore. If we can take away and undermine something as fundamental as AB 32, we could undermine all of those. Dorothy and her oil companies that are funding Prop 23 might come back next year with another initiative that then undoes the Million Solar Roofs. Let me just indicate to you, we've got Valero and Tesoro on one side, And you have on the other side those who are opposed, who are saying no to Prop 23, industrial giants like Waste Management and Shell Oil, energy providers like Sempra Energy and PG&E, entertainment companies like Warner Brothers, health providers like Kaiser Permanente, smart tech giants like Google and eBay, and just yesterday Microsoft. Are they all wrong about the future of California's clean tech economy, and Valero and Tesoro are right? I don't think so.
Ms. Rothrock, we hear a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, let me go to that.
We hear a lot. We hear a lot about Tesoro and Valero. Why are two oil companies?
Yeah, well,
the
let's
biggest
talk about that.
Supporters of this.
First of all, they're not oil companies.
They're not?
They're not. They are refineries. They buy oil. They purchase oil. They don't earn money on oil. They produce gasoline. If the price of oil goes up, they have to pay it. Calling them an oil company is like calling Intel a sand and silicone company, because that's the major input to what they build, which are
So what is
chips.
their interest in supporting Prop 23?
Well, the point is that they have two refineries in California. They've got 1,800 employees. They've got $183 million in payroll. They pay $70 million in taxes. Koch Industries is another supporter. They own Georgia Pacific. They make Dixie cups, corrugated packaging. They've got all sorts of facilities in California. These are California manufacturers. These are folks that have to pay energy bills in California. They employ people here. They pay taxes, and they have steel in the ground in California. How much steel in the ground in California does Tom Spire have? The hedge funds and venture capitalists are in the business of making money by making energy more expensive for people that are actually doing business in California.
Well, let's talk about what's making energy more expensive. I'll give a shameless plug for my book, Lives Per Gallon, if people want to check the facts I'm about to quote. But we pay actually about $10 a gallon for gasoline. The other $7 that you don't see at the pump is the cost of health care for our children. Do you know that according to studies by UC schools, including one of the ones we're standing in here tonight, children who live near our freeways and our ports lose 1% of their lung function every single year because of petroleum-related air pollution. Much of that is also caused by the refineries operated by the two oil companies that are bankrolling Prop 23, which is why so many people are saying no to Prop 23, because they're saying no to these oil companies. And I don't care what you call them, Dorothy, they're oil companies. They manufacture oil. They take oil and they turn it and manufacture it into some other kind of a petroleum product. So let's not parse words. They're oil companies.
Mr. Tammenin, Ms. Rothrock's point was that other states, including Oregon, have been able to generate jobs, green jobs, without an AB 32. So why isn't California, which has taken a lead in so many things, able to match that?
It's not a question of able to match that. They are, as you said, but haven't we always gone further? Don't we always dream bigger? I mean, you pointed that out. Dorothy pointed that out. We've always had a chance to allow our people and to use our market share to lead the nation, not just to wait and see what Oregon does or what China does. And in fact, if you take a look, we're not even the leader in this. 8 other states copied the AB 32, our Global Warming Solutions Act, even cutting and pasting directly into their laws. But now they've gone further than we have. 10 states in the northeastern part of the United States have a cap-and-trade system that's been operating already for 2 years. Their energy bills have not gone up, and in fact, the revenues generated by that have stimulated the green economies there. And it's a very interesting test case if you look at New Jersey, a very large state that just recently, Governor Corzine, who passed that Global Warming Solutions Act there, he was voted out of office, a businessman, a conservative Republican. Governor Christie is now in office there. He did not do anything to dismantle the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the cap-and-trade system, because it's generating money that helps him balance his state budget, keep firemen on the job, police on the job, teachers on the job, and offset some of that pollution and the healthcare costs that I mentioned earlier.
And so, Ms. Rothrock, there are already laws that are on the books and coming online that will require solar and alternative wind energy production in California, cleaner cars to showrooms. So what, in a way, does Prop 23 make much of a difference at all, given how much is already in the pipeline and that this law has been on the books for 4 years already?
Well, it's interesting to me how vehemently people are defending the ability to go forward with a cap-and-trade program that really only applies in California. I mean, it's extraordinary because we're saying, listen, give us a break. You've got all these other policies. We've got $4.some billion coming from the federal government to invest in clean energy development here through the stimulus funding. We've got all sorts of monies we pay in energy bills. Already, it's like it's overkill to be doing a cap and trade program and adding just additional costs on California only, where all of the rest of the country is not also going along. Why are not the Western states in the Western Climate Initiative going along with our cap and trade program if it's such a good idea?
All right, Mr. Tammenin, why not?
Well, in fact, here again, this is some of the misinformation that is spread when you have millions of dollars of oil company money backing a proposition. The Western Climate Initiative that Dorothy mentions includes 13 Western states, Canadian provinces, Mexican states. The entire west coast of North America is actually getting together to tame global warming, to tame the other pollution that comes with it. But it's also this misinformation that AB 32 is somehow just about a cap and trade system. Actually, the greenhouse gas reductions that come from cap and trade are only about 20% of the reductions overall that would be achieved by AB 32. Most of it comes from being more efficient, from saving money. Who hasn't bought an Energy Star appliance that's thanks to California regulations and saved money? Who hasn't changed their light bulbs and found that the new light bulbs pay themselves back in as little as 7 months? I mean, who hasn't put more insulation in their home and discovered they can lower their energy costs? And a lot of that was incentivized and made possible by these kinds of progressive laws that California has led the nation on. And again, California is not going alone on any of this.
We're at UCLA talking about Proposition 23, which would roll back many of the provisions of AB 32, California's landmark greenhouse gas law. We're here with a live audience. You'll be hearing some questions from them. And in a couple of minutes, you're going to be hearing our panel of experts query the two people on either side of Prop 23. In the meantime, I'm Pat Morrison on 89.3 KPCC. Back in a moment with more on Proposition 23 on your November 2nd ballot. I'm Pat Morrison. We are here at UCLA. Debating the pros and cons, the pluses and minuses of Proposition 23. The supporters call it the California Jobs Initiative. The opponents label it the Dirty Energy Proposition. You can tell what side is what because of the names that they apply to this. We're talking about how it will affect California's AB 32, the greenhouse gas law, jobs issues, environmental quality issues, all coming to the fore in Proposition 23 on the November 2nd ballot. We're going to hear from our proponent and opponent in questions put by a panel of 3 experts. Each of them will have a few minutes to put those questions to our experts. Ann Carlson is on the faculty here at the Emmett Center on Climate Change and the Environment. Her scholarship focuses on climate change law and policy, federal policy, and she served on the National Academy of Science panel, America's Climate Choices. Thank you very much for being here. So, Ann Carlson, you have questions for both panelists, and go ahead.
I do. Thank you. Let me start with Terry. So, Terry, supporters of greenhouse gas emissions reductions are always reassuring the public that things like cap and trade won't result in higher energy prices to consumers of electricity, consumers of gasoline, and so forth. But don't we need higher prices in order to achieve greenhouse gas emissions? Isn't part of the problem that consumers aren't paying for the costs that using those fuels actually impose on the environment and on health and so forth?
It's true that there are a lot of hidden costs to our fossil fuel addiction that are not paid at the pump or when we flip on the light switch. But obviously businesses run on energy, family budgets run on energy, and state budgets at a time when they're struggling to pay teachers and firefighters also run on energy. And you don't need to take my word for it. Let me quote UC Berkeley professor David Roland Holst, who issued a report that if AB 32 is scuttled, which Prop 23 would do, electricity costs would rise by 1/3 over the next decade. So I don't think, I get your point, Ann, that obviously there's a price signal at which point people use less, and then that obviously reduces pollution. But I don't think the economy wants to see the prices rise 1/3 as they would under Prop 23.
So, Dorothy, here's a question for you. Business interests in California historically have been notorious for crying wolf about the high cost of environmental regulation, particularly when those regulations are proposed. They're always screaming that it's going to cost way more than they can afford, and they're virtually always wrong. Their cost estimates are inflated, and it turns out it's not as expensive to comply with environmental regulations as their estimates suggest during the proposal phase. So why should we believe business interests when all of the incentives of your clients are to argue in favor of higher estimates than may actually result?
Well, you're asking kind of theoretical question. I don't really know what you're speaking about.
Okay, so let me be more specific. Car manufacturers, every time there are new regulations proposed by the California Air Resources Board, scream that they're not going to be able to afford those regulations. It's going to impose huge new costs on purchasers of cars and so forth. And then once the regulations are implemented, it turns out not to be so expensive after all. So why should we believe the California Manufacturers Association and Tesoro and Valero that the costs are going to be so high for this cap and trade system when all your incentives are to say they're going to be high because you're trying to get an initiative passed?
This sort of goes back to the question you asked Terry about we need higher energy prices in order to incentivize energy efficiency or reduction in use or whatever to get off our addiction or whatever. But the point is that the cap and trade, which I keep coming back to because that's really what we're talking about here, is designed to add costs. That's its purpose. It doesn't have any other countervailing benefit coming other than it will raise the costs in order to make it so that people will use less or adopt some expensive technology to avoid the cost. So it is a pricing mechanism. It isn't a technology that we're imposing on the economy to make us use less. It's a price. So by definition, it will raise costs. I mean, there's no escaping that.
Yeah, although isn't part of the purpose of cap and trade to allow businesses to find the cheapest cost reductions that might include things like energy efficiency in order to save energy and therefore not increase costs?
Well, let me suggest that we are already paying a very high carbon tax in California already. We have higher electricity prices, I said it earlier, for manufacturing, 53% higher rates, 35% higher rates for commercial. We have high residential rates as well because we have had such progressive policies for so many years. We are already giving on this front. The other states in the country, however, who are using cheap coal or lots of hydro or whatever other kinds of resources are paying much, much lower rates. We are adding costs on top of an already very high cost state that will cause more job migration out of the state. There's no question about it. And the economists agree. LAO says it. I'm not making it up. It's not just the manufacturers saying it. The LAO says there will be short-term costs.
That's the legislative analyst's office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Terry, another question for you. So California could stop emitting any greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, and it wouldn't have any effect on the fact that we're going to experience rapid climate change because of India's emissions and China's emissions and Brazil's emissions and so forth. So does it really make sense for a state to be engaging and trying to curb emissions when this is a global problem, or at least ought to be addressed at the national level?
It's interesting that I think it was about 1960, researchers here at UCLA coined the term smog. And I think those of you who are old enough to remember how dirty the air was back then remembered that we had stage 1 alerts when they finally started to regulate it, when they finally started to measure it. They realized how many people were dying from petroleum-related air pollution, and California started to regulate it. Nobody said, well, you know what, Houston's dirty, China's dirty, we don't need to bother with that, it's okay, our little bit doesn't add that much. And the fact is that today, in the United States, 6.5 million of us go to the hospital every year with asthma and other respiratory diseases that are the direct result of petroleum-related air pollution contributed to by Tesoro and Valero, the people who are bankrolling Prop 23, 100,000 of Americans die prematurely every single year from the same preventable source of air pollution that they want to keep us addicted to. And that's the reason that the American Lung Association has come out so strong for no on Prop 23, because they know that this measure is literally stealing the breath of our children. We don't need to wait for someone else, China or India or anyone else, to tell us that that's wrong.
Our next set of questions comes from Matthew Kahn. He's a professor at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability. His latest book is Climatopolis, How Our Cities Will Thrive in the Hotter World. Matthew Kahn, thank you for your questions and your participation.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dorothy and Terry for joining us tonight. This is a fascinating debate. Dorothy, a question. We have a nascent green tech sector here in California. As these men and women plan and make investments that could create jobs, do you worry about this sort of stop-go policy? Don't businesses need certainty in forming their expectations and their investment profiles?
First, I can't resist. I'm going to answer that. But Prop 23 does not repeal the Clean Air Act. All of the air quality issues that he's describing are unrelated to Prop 23. It's a diversion. I don't know why they're making a big deal about it in the campaign. All I can say is they must be desperate. The polling must be close, because it's simply scare tactics. Honestly, they should be ashamed. With regard to nascent green energy development, most of the policies are going forward. Do you know that there's $200 million coming to clean or sort of alternative transportation fuel development? In your vehicle license fee, you pay it. You probably don't even know it. $200 million a year is going to that. The folks that are actually doing this development, the clean energy work, are relying on the Renewable Portfolio Standard. They're relying on these grants and loans for this kind of R&D. They are working on battery development because the vehicle manufacturers know that they need to reduce their mileage per gallon, and that's going to be a big part of it. All of this is happening, and it's not going to stop with Prop 23. There's plenty of incentives for us to be moving forward in all of these things. We just need to remove the most expensive regulations under AB 32, and that's the cap and trade.
Terry? AB 32 is a major piece of legislation. Economists always worry about unintended consequences, and we're learning that we're not as smart as we thought we were before this financial crisis. Are there potential unintended consequences of AB 32 that you worry about?
Sure, and I will answer that question, but I'll use the same license that Dorothy did here. I totally agree. This has nothing to do with repealing the Clean Air Act, but when you stop reducing emissions of one kind of pollution, there's lots of other pollution that goes with it. So let's talk about who's being misleading here. And I'll just quote directly from the title of the proposition: suspends implementation of air pollution control law. That seems pretty straightforward to me. Air pollution is killing our kids. The American Lung Association gets it. Why don't you? So the unintended consequences, I couldn't agree with you more. That's one of the reasons we have a legislature. We have two of our legislators here in the audience tonight. We have Bonnie Reese, our Secretary of Education, here tonight. Thank you to them for their service. It's why we're going to the polls in about a week or so to elect officials, so that if changes need to be made, they can be made. Prop 23 simply introduces uncertainty. I have to tell you that the one thing, you mentioned it before, or in the debate somebody mentioned before, that businesses are always asking for certainty. They're saying, we can adjust to a little bit more of this, less of that, regulation, what have you. We just want certainty so we can plan hiring and budgets and capital expenditures and so forth. I get that. Well, Prop 23 rolls back certainty. It says, well, we're going to suspend air pollution control laws until this happens, but maybe not that happens. And Dorothy, as she mentioned, the thing that would trigger the repeal, essentially, of Prop 23 only happens one time out of 3 times out of every 10 years or something like that. Problem is, that's uncertainty. At least AB 32 gives you certainty. It gave you a market advisory committee that allowed the CMTA and many others to come to the table and advise the regulations how they should be thoughtfully made. You'll notice it was passed in 2006, and none of the regulations have yet been implemented. The ones that Dorothy's so worried about wouldn't even be implemented for 3 more years. And that's because the legislature and the Air Resources Board are taking a very thoughtful approach, listening to everyone, getting the economic data, trying to be very careful about how they go ahead and implement this. And that's not something that Prop 23 would allow you to do. And that's one of the reasons I think that both Meg Whitman and Jerry Brown, our 2 candidates for governor, are voting no on Prop 23.
Dorothy, the Brattle Group, a leading consulting firm, just did an interesting case study, and it's only one data point. But they went to Mercado International 2000, a grocery store in Chula Vista, and to their surprise, when they took a look at this grocery, and they did a micro nitty-gritty case study of how this firm would react to AB 32 legislation, and they walked away quite optimistic that this firm could adapt in the face of these rules. Why are you so pessimistic about California businesses' nimbleness in being able to respond to credible new rules of the game?
Can I speak about the regulatory certainty for a moment first?
Please.
We're taking control here.
Let's do
Let's
it, Dorothy.
get rid of these people. Let's talk.
I don't think so.
You said that 3 years, it'll be 3 years before we have these regulations. We're going to have a cap and trade regulation, I think, at the end of next week. But guess what we still don't know? I mean, we're talking
Your
about...
references to the board that's beginning to make the policies for implementing
Yes.
these as of 2012.
We have a cap and trade regulation coming. We don't know what our allocation of allowances is going to be. We don't know what permits are going to cost. We don't know what kind of impact it's going to have on the utilities in terms of how much their prices are going to go up. The 97% of the economy that's not in the clean energy sector does not know what this price is going to be. They just know that it's going to be big. That is uncertainty, and that's what's happening now. The 3% of the economy, at most, that's involved in the clean energy sector wants this burden because that'll make their technologies more profitable. And that's who's supporting the no side of the campaign, the folks that want to make money selling expensive technologies that wouldn't otherwise be profitable without these policies. So let's get clear that we're talking about business against business and who's going to win. I'm saying they've got plenty on their side already. Plenty of certainty, plenty of available grant money and incentives and renewable portfolio standards and all this stuff. I keep going back to it. That's not going away. It's just this additional big multi-billion-dollar cost that's going to be landing on manufacturers and consumers and local governments and everybody else that pays an electric bill.
All right, and to Matthew Kahn's question?
Who? You talked about the Brattle Group and that individual's case study of somebody that would survive AB 32.
These guys went further. Of a nimble firm, maybe they're UCLA graduates, of the ability to use the mind and to respond to a new regulatory environment by being able to change their act and to face low costs in the new regulatory environment.
Would they be subject to cap and trade?
They would be they were using electricity for their frozen fish. And so, yes, and they responded by swapping out their energy systems and taking other actions to shrink their electricity bill.
And I also have hundreds of members in my association that every year are looking at opportunities to lower their electric bill through adopting various technologies. And part of this is tariffs and pricing and who has the incentive to reduce and who doesn't. It's an ongoing process. It's happening now. It'll happen into the future. The point is, why are we doubling down on the high price? Isn't the price high enough? I think the folks on the no side are getting greedy about all the incentives and the burdens that they want to impose. Aren't we paying enough? How high, what kind of premium do you want us to, 53% premium in electricity bills for manufacturers isn't enough?
All right, let's have the next set of questions from Margot Roosevelt. She covers climate change and air pollution issues for the LA Times. She also worked for the Washington Post and Time Magazine. Margot, have at it.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's going on the ground right now. This question is for both of you. Terry can start first. The polls show that Proposition 23 is heading for defeat. The environmentalists and the Silicon Valley technology executives have raised 3 times the amount that Valero and Tesoro and the refinery industry have raised for Proposition 23. But while this money is pouring in from Bill Gates and Gordon Moore and the National Wildlife Federation, the Sierra Club, everybody, to defeat Proposition 23, a whole bunch of companies, including Chevron and other oil companies, the tobacco companies, are pouring money into a different proposition, and that's Proposition 26. One of the leading environmentalists, head of environmental group this past week, said that Proposition 23 would kill AB 32, the global warming law, but Proposition 26, which would impose fees, including any fees that come out of AB 32 and any other environmental fees, that Proposition 26 would strangle AB 32 and global warming legislation slowly. Another environmental leader called it the evil twin of Prop 23. So my question is, what do you think the effect of Prop 26 would be on AB 32, on global warming regulations,
okay.
and on other environmental regulations?
But before you answer, I want to clarify. Marco, am I right that Proposition 26 would reclassify a lot of fees as taxes and therefore require a 2/3 vote for those taxes, formerly fees?
Exactly.
Okay. Terry Tammenin?
And if it requires a 2/3 vote, we know what's been going on in the legislature with the budget.
Terry Tammenin?
Well, look, I think that's unfortunately too speculative to get into tonight, Margot, with all due respect. And Dorothy was talking about the need for certainty, and I appreciate that. And I think the regulations and the regulatory process she discussed is exactly the kind of certainty that businesses are looking for, so they know how to adjust and to make their long-term plans. The very regulatory process she said something's going to start next week. It's not going to impose a single cost on anyone next week. We're starting to figure out how to measure our greenhouse gas emissions, who's actually polluting our air. I'm sure that's one of the reasons Tesoro and Valero are putting money into this campaign for Prop 23. And yes, it's true that more money has poured in on the other side, but when you have 3 large oil companies, when you include Koch brothers from Oklahoma, who poured lots of money in early, you can imagine that obviously the tin cup was out for those of us who believe that we should vote no on Prop 23. I also want to just make the point, Dorothy was saying that these businesses who are putting money into the no on Prop 23 side are all going to make money from AB 32. So you're telling me that Shell Oil, who is opposed to Prop 23, is going to make money somehow off of AB 32. Waste Management is going to. The huge property companies, Thomas Properties and Majestic Realty, both of whom say vote no on Prop 23, they're somehow going to.
Are they supporting Prop 26, though?
I don't know that. Again, as I said, I think that's a bit too speculative for tonight's debate. But the
Dorothy,
consumer protection groups, the
on
AARP and the American Lung Association, are also saying no on 23. So they're not going to make any money off of this.
Okay. Margot, did you have a follow-up?
Terry, I think you're reinforcing my question, which is that all the attention is going on to Prop 23, which is going down to defeat, while the oil companies are putting money now into 26. And is anybody paying attention to that? So
and they are, as you said, there's pros and cons on both sides and money being poured into both. Dorothy may have some further thoughts on that.
Companies have a responsibility to their employees, their shareholders, their markets, their customers, and they make decisions on what to do politically that, you try to get behind and try to understand the motives because it's good press and it's kind of fun, but I think each individual company is going to have their own answer to that. looking, since we're on the topic of who's supporting what and where and why, I think of interest to the Prop 23 debate is how many Hispanic, Black chambers are in support of Prop 23. They see a huge sort of disproportionate impact on
the
minority
question's about
communities.
Prop 26, Dorothy. Why are the oil companies, the tobacco companies, and all your members pouring money into an initiative which would, many environmentalists say, strangle AB 32?
Well, we're not here to talk about Prop 26. I mean, it's probably takes a fuller discussion to really understand what that's all about, but it has to go to what the powers of the government are to increase fees or taxes. As you know, Prop 13 creates a system where, for the most part, you need 2/3 votes for taxes, but yet the legislature and agencies with lots of power have the ability to impose fees. But the question is, what's the difference between a fee and a tax? That's what Prop 26 is about. Because with a huge budget deficit like we have now, there's going to be an inclination for legislators and agencies to look for fees in order to backfill what they can't pass in taxes.
Okay.
Margot, if I could just add one more quick point on that,
Very
since you've
quickly,
asked the
please.
question. Obviously, there's another measure on the ballot this year, this month, that would change the threshold for passing a budget to a simple majority from right now the 2/3 requirement in the legislature. That could have as much effect on this as we're talking about, but clearly Prop 26 could have that effect that you're talking about, and that is the reason the oil companies and the tobacco companies are pouring money into it.
Okay, Margot Roosevelt, your next question?
Dorothy,
Yeah.
your trade group of manufacturers and technology companies endorsed Prop 23, but hardly any of your members have contributed significant funds to the initiative. That led Valero to sorrow and just a few refineries twisting in the wind without enough money to push it through. Why was there so little follow-through from your members?
Well, if you look at the press, you know, companies care about their public image and they care about how they're, seen in the public. And frankly, the no side of that campaign has been so negative. It's been so, mean-spirited that I think a lot of companies are going, why should I put my CEO out in front on this? Honest to God. And it's too bad because these are California companies. And I think it's really shameful. There's 1,400 employees in Valero. They do hard work, they do a good job, they provide a product that Californians buy. And you know what? If we're not refining it in California, guess who's learning how to make California qualified gasoline? The Asians. You can put Valero out of business in California. We'll be shipping in gasoline from Asia. What does that do to our economy? What does that do to national security? Does that make any sense at all? We still need to buy it. We still need to use it. Let's make it here.
One final quick question for Terry. Dorothy has talked a lot about how the renewable portfolio standard would go forward, even if Prop 23 were to pass. But isn't the renewable 33% renewable portfolio standard an executive order by Governor Schwarzenegger? And if, say, another governor like Meg Whitman were to come into office, she could overturn that 33% renewable standard?
Parts of the renewable portfolio standard are set in law, and there was an effort to solidify more of those standards, a greater standard into law this year, and that didn't pass. And you're right, that was done by an executive order. The Air Resources Board also solidified that. But yes, that could be undone by further executive order unless it's mandated by the legislature.
Dorothy, do you want to respond to that?
Very quickly.
I'm sorry.
The renewable portfolio standard
Well,
is an executive order, but
right.
AB 32 would put it into regulation.
Yeah, AB 32, in fact, CARB had just adopted the 33%. It was also a topic of legislation. It may end up passing as legislation next year. There's actually some legislators who believe that CARB doesn't have authority to pass it under AB 32. It's in kind of a limbo state. Mm-hmm. Right now, we do have a very aggressive renewable portfolio standard with the 20%.
Margot Roosevelt, the LA Times, thank you so much. And if you think it has been pointed so far, wait till you get a load of the audience questions coming up next as we talk about Proposition 23, which would roll back provisions of AB 32, California's greenhouse gas emissions, with certain considerations. We've been hearing about what those considerations are and the debate over the fallout of going forward with AB 32 or instituting Prop 23. Back with questions from the audience. Here at UCLA, I'm Pat Morrison. I'm Pat Morrison. Welcome back to UCLA. And the debate on Proposition 23 on the November 2nd ballot. The supporters call it the California Jobs Initiative. The opponents say it's the dirty energy proposition. It would roll back provisions of AB 32, California's greenhouse gas law. We've been hearing from our panel and from some experts, and now we're going to hear from the voters who are going to have the ultimate say-so about this. Some questions for our panels. Please tell us who you are, your first name, where you're from, and your question.
My name is Holland. I'm from Hollywood, and my question is for Ms. Rothrock. Which members of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association do you believe would be the most affected by
Oh, that's a great question. I think the highly energy intensive and globally competitive, or firms that are subject to global competition in their products, cement, steel, paper products, the folks who really are subject to a worldwide market. They can't pass along the costs of AB 32 onto their consumers. They simply need to absorb those costs. And every additional cost cuts into whatever margin they've got left. And they're already bearing such high costs that any more is going to really cause them to perhaps have to shut down. And then we'll just increase imports from somewhere else.
Thank you. Our next question is from where, from who, and to whom?
My name is Julio Giron, and I represent the legal Latino community, not the illegals. That's a different corruption. But my question to you is, sir, those liars on the no on 23, 14%. In my community, the unemployment rate right now, without the illegal alien community, and us who are legally in the country, is 14.7. How you are guaranteeing that many people who have jobs, thanks to the good companies that you said are the evil, Valero and the oil company, how are you going to guarantee with all that wacko thing of the environment that they are not going to lose their jobs? How can you guarantee?
Sir, I cannot, but first of all, let me make it clear to you that I don't consider the oil companies evil. In fact, I want to civilize them. I want to make sure that your friends and the employees of those companies are still working 10 and 20 years from now when oil runs out, when if we don't impose some kind of restriction on the pollution that it's causing, someone else will. Consumers will. Consumers are going to move to other things. We want to help them. You know, Valero and Tesoro made $9 billion in the state of California in the last 5 years. How much of that did your employees get? And I'm guessing that if they took some of that and put it into clean energy, that they would probably come out much better off in the end. We don't want to harm the oil companies. We want to help them. They're addicted just as much as we are. We want to take up a collection and help these poor guys.
How much is that collection again?
Well, $9 billion if you want to match how much money they took out of California in the last 5 years.
Let's take our next question from the audience here at UCLA.
My name is Bill McGavran. I'm visiting from Sacramento, and I want to follow up on Margot's question. I think she asked a great question and didn't get a very good answer. So Terry Tammenin, you were the Secretary for Environmental Protection, so you know that the air boards, including the AB 32 program, the air quality programs, other programs at Cal EPA like toxics, pesticides, water board, those programs are funded mainly by fees on the polluters, rather than having the taxpayers pay. So if Prop 26, the Polluter Protection Act, were to pass and those fees were reclassified as taxes and require a 2/3 vote, what would be the impact on California's environmental protection efforts?
It could be very devastating. You're absolutely right that 90% of the funds that fund the California Environmental Protection Agency and all the good work that they're doing come from fees on polluters. The polluter pays, not the taxpayer. And so that's why I'm voting no on Prop 26 and voting no on Prop 23. But of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in that. And we've talked tonight about certainty and the fact that business and consumers all want certainty. So by voting no on both of these propositions, I think you get that certainty.
And our next question is from whom and to who?
My name is Joanne McDonald. I'm from the Thousand Oaks area of Ventura County. I would love it if Terry and Dorothy could comment on the moral and ethical aspects of this debate. Should we be pursuing a proposition which has the potential, or at least the perception, of compromising our environment and the health of Californians?
Ladies
And
first.
Dorothy Rothrock, if you'd like to speak briefly to that, both of you.
It's a good question because I hope I'm going to answer it the way you want me to, but I think a lot of the energy on the no side is because there's a feeling that it's really important to send a message, or that we need to make sure that California is saying it's really important to deal with climate change and we want everybody else to also join us and do it. And, it's sort of like, well, yeah, but at what cost? And can't we send the message in another way? Because we are doing so much, even without AB 32 or the most burdensome regulations that are going to come from it, that why are we pretending that this is the end of it all? Instead of turning around and saying, listen, we're going to do this the best way possible, and we're going to be a model for the rest of the country and the world on how you can grow manufacturing, grow an economy, produce what you consume in the location that you live, as opposed to an unsustainable situation where we let manufacturing drift away to other countries and yet just keep consuming it and importing it in. That seems to be morally wrong. And that's where I am on the yes side. And I thought yes was a good idea on Prop 23 before it was even Prop 23 and before anybody put any money on either side of it because of that issue.
All right, and a very quick comment from Terry Tammenin.
Let me talk about another aspect of the morality. According to the small business majority, AB 32 will increase revenues to small businesses in California by $4.6 billion by 2020 and add more than 15,000 jobs. There's a morality, as that first questioner was asking me about people who might be unemployed today and might be looking for those clean jobs. We have a morality to the kids who live near the freeways who are losing 1% of their lung function every single year from the pollution that comes along with the rest of the pollution that Prop 23 would overturn.
All right, our next question comes from
Ronald Stein. I'm with PTS Staffing Solutions. This question is for Terry. By 2012, less than 2 years from now, China and India will be completing their major expansions and be capable of providing 100% of our transportation fuels for the 50 million cars and trucks in California. These countries with no environmental controls and cost-effective fuels can be our source of mobility energy for when all 12 of the refineries have closed, including Valero and Tesoro. Facilities that manufacture transportation fuels represent about 1% of the emissions identified by CARB.
And your question?
The question is, since there's no silver bullets to our energy situation, why shouldn't we keep the jobs here, the technology here, while we buy some time to figure this problem out?
I totally agree with you. We absolutely should keep the jobs here, and that's exactly what we want to do by saying no to Prop 23. China tried to buy the Unocal oil company, actually, when I was in state government. And the federal government looked at that and had great fears about that, not because they were going to close those refineries and produce 100% of our petroleum needs, our refined petroleum needs, not at all. They wanted to gobble it up and use it for their own growth. They wouldn't be giving any of that to us. So trust me, our refineries, the 24 refineries in the state of California, are not going away. Valero and Tesoro, that took $9 billion out of the California economy in the last 5 years alone, is not going to stop serving 30 million motorized vehicles and 38 million Californians.
By the way, Valero has not been profitable in California since 2007.
Why are they still operating here?
They're asking that question of themselves.
Okay, next question.
Hi, my name's Andy. I'm from Culver City. My question is about this report, The Truth About Green Jobs in California, recently put out by Cal Lutheran University and CMTA, which claims that California's economy is going to weaken if we implement these measures. But the conclusion of the report, as I was reading it, says government intervention is appropriate, and that as we shift to costly new technologies, mandated adoption and/or government subsidies can help us. So my question is, if the research you're touting actually supports government's intervention and regulation for helping us shift towards cleaner, more efficient technologies, why are you opposing it?
Good question. In fact, there was a really good piece I just read a few days ago, and I can't remember where it was, but it talks about, okay, if we don't have cap and trade anymore, which we know is sort of off the table at the federal level and becoming increasingly problematic for a lot of reasons, what should the policies be? And there's a bipartisan group coming together that's looking at the kind of direct sort of contributions, grants, funding, research, partnerships with universities and venture capitalists and whatever, to really target the technologies that we need to get developed in order to make this transformation happen. That's really what it's going to take. A marginal increase in energy prices is not necessarily going to drive technology if the choice of the company that would be buying that technology is to go manufacture somewhere else instead. You're not getting technology improvement, you're just getting leakage. But a more targeted, structured, purposeful government program is really what we need, and that's what a good energy policy would do.
And the next question, please.
Yes, I'm Sandy from a Southern California resident. My question is, if Prop 23 passes, and it would be suspended after we reach 5.5 unemployment, what if it only gets to 5? Yeah, for 1 year. What if it only gets to 5.6? Would 23 last forever? I mean, is there an end to 23 at some point?
Well, it's possible that it would stay off indefinitely. It looks like the recovery is going to be so slow, we're going to have high unemployment for so long, that frankly, that's something that should make us feel a little bit worried about California and make us even more reluctant to want these extra costs to be imposed. But federal policy, other state policies, you know that the U.S. EPA is looking at 3 different climate change rules right now that are going to be coming down. Those are going to impact California companies, consumers, but the good news is it's going to be across the country, and everybody is going to be participating. So we're not losing anything with AB 32 being suspended.
Terry Tammenin.
No offense, Dorothy, but I couldn't even follow that. But I have to tell you the answer to that lady's question. There is an end to Prop 23. It's called voting on November 2nd, no on Prop 23. That's how you put an end to it.
Our next question.
Yes, my name is Ezequiel Gutierrez. I'm a resident of Southern California, of the Lakewood community. I grew up in Watts. I graduated from David Starr Jordan High School. I feel that the position that Proposition 23 is exploiting minorities and fears that people have of continuation of employment. But specifically, my question is, can you please answer Pat's question? Which specific jobs would be lost if Proposition 23 does not pass? I know that, for example, 97,000 jobs in manufacturing have been created through the green movement.
All right.
And 97,000 in construction. But what will be lost if 23 doesn't pass?
Dorothy Rothrock.
The best answer, which might not be exactly what you want to know, because any individual job, of course, depends on the decisions that are made for that particular company. But the best kind of outline of that came from the Berkeley Center, Labor Center, who talked about 2.3 million jobs they thought were at risk with AB 32. And their biggest concern was that many of those jobs are held by male, Latino heads of household. And they said, you know what, we've got to worry about this, and we've got to have some transition going on here to help those individuals whose jobs are at risk transfer into some other kind of employment. And that's why, other supporters of Prop 23 include California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce,
right,
Hispanic Silicon Valley Black Chamber of Commerce, et cetera.
Okay, yeah. And Terry Tammenin, quickly.
Very quickly, let me tell you about OCR Roofing outside of Sacramento, California, a roofing company that when the construction industry in California was going in the tank in the last few years was faced with laying off 150 workers, most of them minorities. Instead, they started teaching them how to put solar panels on rooftops and make other energy improvements to households. Today, they employ 250 people, and they got bought out by a huge roofing company, making it profitable for both the owners and the employees, who are still working today while the construction industry is still in the tank.
Another question, please, from our audience.
Hi, I'm Alice Struffel from Pasadena, and I have a question for both speakers. Dorothy Rothrock mentioned that the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I believe, is for Prop 23.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it true that the California Black Chamber of Commerce has just come down against 23, as well as a whole host of ethnic organizations, including environmental justice organizations? And how does this affect the debate?
And your question for Mr. Tammenin at the same time?
How does this, the fact that so many organizations that are involved in environmental justice and those who are most affected by air quality have come down against Proposition 23?
Let's start with Mr. Tammenin and go to
I would say one
Ms.
thing
Rothrock.
is that the environmental justice community, which is a lot of people who live downwind of refineries and port complexes and so forth, they were part of the environmental justice working group that was written into the law of AB 32 to make sure that their interests were represented. Obviously, if you roll back AB 32 by passing Prop 23, you lose that.
And Ms. Rothrock?
Let me just say that the most important public health impact associated with AB 32 is losing a job. Honest to God, if you have health care, if you've got insurance, you're going to have a better health outcome. Clean Air Act stays in effect. Those refiners are subject to the most stringent air quality rules in the country, and they will remain that way. The other supporters of Prop 23, National Federation of Independent Business, California State Firefighters Association, all of them agree that the increased costs are something that we don't have to accept in order to take this economy into a good, clean future. The folks on the environmental justice side of things are folks that are living around refineries. Again, I can't get into their motives, but I think they're wrong. They're just wrong.
We have time for each of you to make a closing statement of about 30 seconds. So, Ms. Rothrock, I began with you. If you would begin, we'll end with Mr. Tammenin.
Well, I thank you all for having us here. I've actually had a really good time, and I thought the questions were very good. I'm interested in seeing California going forward. I would like a really robust, clean technology development happen here. I want to make sure that the manufacturing happens here. We have good R&D, we have good incentives for people to want to do venture capital and all that stuff, but the bottom line is going to be whether we can get manufacturing here. And I think we can have both with Prop 23.
All right, Terry Tammenin.
I say vote no on Prop 23 because doing so will help us to spur our greater fuel efficiency and green tech jobs that have just started to grow in this state when all the other manufacturing jobs have been declining long before AB 32 was even written. It will lower your taxes because obviously if you spur the economy, more people are working. That raises more taxes in the economy, spread more broadly. It gives us job opportunities in the green economy to jumpstart a whole new economic renaissance in this state, just like aerospace and high tech did for many years. It'll cut pollution that's literally stealing the breath of our children and keep us from being entangled in foreign wars over a barrel of oil, which is why even former Secretary of State George Shultz says that this is an issue where you must vote no on Prop 23.
I want to thank both of our debaters. As you heard, the live and lively audience here at UCLA, Terry Tammenin, CEO of Seventh Generation Advisors, also former Secretary of the California Environmental Protection Agency, played a role in the passage of AB 32, parts of which would be undone by Proposition 23, represented by Dorothy Rothrock, Senior Vice President of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and representing those manufacturers and business interests in California. My thanks to Ann Carlson, the Environmental Law and Faculty Director at the Emmett Center of Climate Change and the Environment at the UCLA School of Law. Thanks to you. Matthew Kahn, Professor of Economics at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, also asking questions of our representatives. And Margot Roosevelt, climate reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Thanks to the three of you. And the audience here at UCLA, you voted a little over a week.